As we start learning about World War II, we need to set the scene a little bit. So this lecture is really going to focus on some pre-war ideas about different government styles and different political ideologies. So you'll notice that your note sheet is actually horizontal instead of vertical for this particular PowerPoint. And with that, we have it set up so that the government system at the top of the pyramid or the triangle there is the one with the least amount of government control. Of course, there is one above democracy. If there's no government, that's known as anarchy. But for our purposes here, the democracy is one with the least amount of control. Then you move down to authoritarian and then totalitarian. So we'll start with democracy. The key thing about democracy really is that its job is to serve the people. In a democracy, citizens hold the power, citizens have freedoms, and they elect their leaders in order to represent them. In a democracy, no one is above the law. And when we talk about the law or think about the law, it really is deeply rooted in our Constitution. It's a very clear, very strong foundation, and it would be very difficult to change the Constitution as we've seen throughout our history. With the idea of the Constitution, you know what to expect, you know what the laws are. But really, the key priority in a democracy is to hear from the people and to make sure that the rights and freedoms of the people are protected and not threatened. If we move down the scale to the next government system that would have more control than a democracy, you're looking at an authoritarian government. In an authoritarian government system, the nation holds control over certain aspects of its people's lives. Not all aspects, but maybe some of them. So for example, the government might control the media, but not control the economy or the religion. So again, they have control over just some aspects, but not all of them. In an authoritarian government system, they have a strong central power. And sometimes because of that, the leaders can actually be above the law. They can make policy changes if they want to, and they don't have checks and balances systems that you might see in a democracy. They also do not have a lot of tolerance for any kind of opposition. So they might try to use terror tactics or fear tactics to scare people away from speaking out about the government. And while I did mention that not all aspects are controlled, there are some individual freedoms in an authoritarian government. But the key there is that the government's going to have more and more control, and those laws as well can be manipulated at times, again, to help out whoever happens to be in charge of the country at that time. The next government system that we're going to look at is a totalitarian government. In a totalitarian government, the nation has total control over its people. The nation dominates every aspect of life for its people, including the economy, things like religion, marriage, curfew, travel restrictions, right, allowing people in and or out of their country. And so every aspect of life is dominated by the government in a totalitarian government system. They also use terror tactics to suppress individual rights, to prevent anybody from speaking out against the government. An important thing for a totalitarian government is to make sure that they control the media. That way they control any messages that get out to people. And so they're able to maybe hide anything that they don't want the people to hear or to know. They silence their opposition, oftentimes maybe throwing them in prison camps or getting rid of them in other ways. The laws are ever changing. Laws are really unpredictable in a totalitarian government system. Again, you don't have checks and balances, and so you don't know what the government's going to do at any given time. Of course, the most potent example that we see of a totalitarian government today is North Korea, right? In North Korea, people are not allowed into North Korea. Their citizens also are not allowed out of North Korea. They control the media, and they also then, with the media, control the internet and what people are actually able to see in North Korea. So many people in North Korea have no idea what life is like outside of their country's borders. The next slide that we're looking at here talks about a dictator or a dictatorship. These are required in most authoritarian countries and all totalitarian. So if you have a totalitarian country, you're going to have either a dictator or a dictatorship. If it's just an individual that's in charge, so is a dictator. If it's a small group of people in charge, it's known as a dictatorship. All right, for the next two slides, you're going to notice they say far left and far right. The first thing that we need to do when understanding the idea of far left and far right is know that we're not talking about the typical American government system where far left would be someone who's very liberal and a far right would be someone who's very conservative. You need to kind of get rid of that thinking for this particular instance because it's not, doesn't really go along with the far left and far right that we are talking about in particular. When we're talking about communism being to the far left, the idea is because they are forward thinking, right? So if you were to draw an arrow on your note sheet that goes to the right, okay, from communism, and draw it facing right, they're forward thinking. They're moving from left to right. They want a new way. Communists are really, really progressive, and it communism has kind of a bad reputation, but the ideas behind it really aren't necessarily that terrible, right? The overall goal is to create a utopian society in which there are shared resources, right? Instead of private property and individuals owning most of the wealth, instead of be the government controlling and distributing the wealth. The idea is to have a society that doesn't really have social classes. Instead of having an upper and a middle and a lower, the idea is to have no classes at all. So again, it's really trying to create this utopian society. However, when you put human beings into that mix, it typically does not work out very well. If you are living in a communist society, again, the government is looking at what's best for the whole, for the entire country, not just an individual. And when we talk about a communist system, I want you to understand and know that really what we're talking about is that a government controls the economy. So in a communist nation, the economy is what is controlled by the government. However, one reason why Americans kind of fear communism, obviously it goes against the ideas of capitalism, but throughout history, communist nations have always started then to move a little bit more towards authoritarian, where maybe it started out that the government was in charge of just the economy, but then they ended up taking more control of other things as time went on. The very last political ideology we're going to look at today is fascism. It's on the far right. Again, do not confuse the left and right in this PowerPoint with left and right with the current United States government system. But fascists are on the far right because they're really facing backwards. They're moving backwards. Their goal is to kind of bring back the old way of life. Typically, it has to do with ethnicity and kind of restoring the superiority of one particular race or ethnicity in a country. We're going to see that when we study the dictators, right? When you have Mussolini and Stalin and Hitler and Hideki Tojo, they all believe that their race is superior and that their countries are superior. That's why they are fascist. The goal of a fascist dictator, fascist leader, is to restore the greatness of their race or ethnicity. And they believe that by doing that, they will then restore the greatness within their country.